going live. There we go. All right, so you have your Bibles. Please open them to chapter 42 of Genesis. So Genesis chapter 42. If you're joining us online, this is Restoration Church of Christ's Bible Study, and we meet every Wednesday at 5 o'clock California time, and we study the scripture until 6 o'clock. Once again, I have no one here with me, but we have people online. So go ahead, say hi online if you're here. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box right there on the right-hand side of the screen. So, chapter 42 of Genesis, we've got the story of Jacob here. And Jacob has been living in Egypt for the last 20 years. And if you can't tell, I'm buying time until either people show up or people join online and start like typing into the chat box. Jacob has been living in Egypt for 20 years now. He's been appointed by Pharaoh to oversee the gathering and storing and disbursement of all of the food in Egypt. And now that there's a famine, Joseph is selling food to the people of Egypt. So let's start reading. It says in chapter 42, verse 1, "Now Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt. And Jacob said to his sons, 'Why do you look at one another?' He said, 'Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy for us from there, so that we may live and not die.' Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt." Now remember, there are 12 brothers. That stands out to me right when I read it. Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob didn't send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he said, "Lest perhaps some harm happen to him." The sons of Israel came to buy amongst those who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Joseph was the governor of the land. It was he who sold to all the people of the land. Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves down to him with their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers, and he recognized them, but acted like a stranger to them and spoke roughly with them. He said to them, "Where did you come from?" So Joseph is pretending not to recognize his brothers. Remember, it was his brothers that sold him into slavery in the first place. So what do you think he's doing here? He is deceiving them, but why? Why doesn't he just, let them know who he is right away? So here the passage really invites us to think back. Why is Joseph acting in this strange way towards his brothers? Think back to the moment when he was sold into slavery in Egypt, the last time that he saw his brothers. Think about what could be going through his head. Joseph saw his brothers, and he recognized them, but acted like a stranger to them and spoke roughly with them. He said to them, "Where did you come from?" They said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So in verse 8, Joseph recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. After all, it's been 20 years since they last saw him. Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamt about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." So Joseph here remembers the dreams that he'd had of his brothers, of the sheaves of grain that bowed down before his sheaf of grain, and his star and their stars bowing down to his star, and the sun and the moon also bowing down to his star. So he speaks roughly to them. He says, "You have come to see the vulnerability of the land." He accuses them of being spies, basically. And he accuses them of looking for the vulnerabilities of Egypt, right? That's what it means to see the nakedness, is to see how the land is vulnerable. They said to him in verse 10, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." He said to them, "No, but you have come to see the nakedness of the land." They said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is today with our father, and one is no more." In verse 14, Joseph said to them, "It is like I told you, saying, 'You are spies. By this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go out from here unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him get your brother, and you shall be bound that your words may be tested, whether there is in you. Or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." He put them all together into custody for 3 days. So here Joseph has not conspired, but he has plotted to meet his youngest brother and to bring him to Egypt. So we see a little bit of Jacob and Joseph here. He's crafty. And he throws them in prison for 3 days. In verse 18, Joseph said to them the third day, "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, then let one of your brothers be bound in your prison, but you go carry grain for the famine of your houses. Bring your youngest brother to me, so will your words be verified and you won't die." They did so. And they said to one another, "We are certainly guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us and we wouldn't listen. Therefore, this distress has come upon us." Reuben answered them, saying, "Didn't I tell you, saying, 'Don't sin against the child'? And you wouldn't listen. Therefore, also, behold, his blood is required." So the phrasing here is kind of strange here, but they're referring to when they sold Joseph into slavery. And what they're saying is that they are suffering now because of what they did to Joseph 20 years ago. And they're saying, "Therefore also behold, his blood is required." In other words, a life for a life. They're saying that they are being punished because of the life that they took. Now remember, they didn't actually kill Joseph, but they sold him into slavery. They don't know whether or not he's alive. And what they're saying here is that blood is required because selling him in slavery in Egypt is basically the same as having killed him themselves. So they didn't know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. So Joseph's been living in Egypt for 20 years. He speaks the Egyptian language, and he apparently speaks it well enough that they don't realize it's not his first language, and an interpreter is speaking to them in Hebrew, even though Joseph speaks fluent Hebrew. Verse 24, he turned himself away from them and wept. Then he returned to them and spoke to them and took Simeon from amongst them and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph gave a command to fill their bags with grain and to restore each man's money into his sack. and to give them food for the way. So it was done to them. They loaded their donkeys with their grain and departed from there. As one of them opened his sack to give his donkey food in the lodging place, he saw his money. Behold, it was in the mouth of the sack. He said to his brothers, "My money is restored. Behold, it is in my sack." The hearts failed them, and they turned, trembling to one another, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" So they paid the man, right? But now the money is back in the bag. And they say, "What is this God has done to us?" Because they know they paid him. So they attribute this chance happening, this strangeness, to something that God has done. And maybe that's a saying, or maybe they literally believe that this is the work of God and that God is somehow testing them or even punishing them. Verse 29, they came to Jacob, their father, to the land of Canaan, and told him all that had happened to them, saying, "The man, the Lord of the land, spoke roughly with us and took us for spies of the country. We said to him, 'We are honest men, we are no spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is today with our father in the land of Canaan.' The man, the Lord of the land, said to us, 'By this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me and take grain for the famine of your houses, and go your way. Bring your youngest brother to me, then I will know that you are not spies, but that you are honest men. So I will deliver your brother to you, and you shall trade in the land.'" So it seems to me Joseph here is testing them, right? He already knows that they don't really value the life of a brother. In fact, that's been Joseph's experience. They sold him into slavery. So, what are they going to do with Simeon? Are they really going to come back for him? What are they going to do about Benjamin? Are they really going to protect him? And how much do they value the life of their father? In a way, this is the trial of the 10 brothers. Joseph is putting them on trial, and he's seeing if the last 20 years have changed them for the better. So here in verse 35, as they emptied their sacks, behold, each man's bundle of money was in his sack. When they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were afraid. Jacob, their father, said to them, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And you want to take Benjamin away. All these things are against me." Reuben spoke to his father, saying, "Kill my 2 sons if I don't bring him to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him to you again." He said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he only is left. If harm happens to him along the way in which you go, then you will bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol." Sheol being the grave or the afterlife. Now, this is the end of the chapter, so if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat box on the right-hand side there. So Benjamin is Joseph's brother, and these two are brothers of the same mother. Remember that Jacob had 4 wives. He had wanted to marry Rachel, but he was deceived into marrying Leah. And so he married Leah, then also married Rachel. But because Rachel couldn't bear children, she gave her, what is the term? Maidservant, I think, it was, to Jacob as a wife to bear her children. And Leah, being jealous, did the same thing with her maidservant. And so Jacob ended up with 4 wives, but Benjamin and Joseph were the 2 sons of one of his wives, Rachel, the wife that he loved the most. And since Joseph is dead, at least as far as Jacob knows, he is overly protective of Benjamin, to the point where if anything should happen to Benjamin, it would grieve him to the point of death. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so we're going to keep going here in chapter 43. It says, "The famine was severe in the land when they had eaten up the grain which they had brought out of Egypt. Their father said to them, 'Go again, buy us a little more food.' Judah spoke to him, saying, 'The man solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you'll send our brother with us, we'll go down and buy you food, but if you don't send him, we won't go down. For the man said to us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.' Israel said, 'Why did you treat me so badly, telling the man that you had another brother?' They said, 'The man asked directly concerning ourselves and concerning our relatives, saying, Is your father still alive? Have you another brother?' We just answered his questions. Is there any way we could know that he would say, 'Bring your brother down'?" Judah said to Israel, his father, "Send the boy with me, and we'll get up and go, so that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I'll be collateral for him. From my hand will you require him. If I don't bring him to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. For if we hadn't delayed, surely we would have returned a second time by now." So they've been back for quite some time then. They stay a few days, apparently until they run out of food. So in verse 11, their father Israel said to them, "If it must be so, then do this. Take from the choice fruits of the land in your bags and carry down a present for the man, a little balm, a little honey, spices and myrrh, nuts and almonds. And take double money in your hand, and take back the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take your brother also, get up, and return to the man. May God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may release to you your other brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved." So here we see how hard it is for Jacob to let Benjamin go down to Egypt. But he has resigned himself. He says, if I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. What else can I do? I think it's interesting too that we see that they do have food, right? They have balm, honey, spices, myrrh, nuts, and almonds. All these things grow on trees. Well, honey, obviously not, but spices, nuts, almonds, these all grow on trees. But you can't make a diet of almonds, can you? You can only eat so many. So they need real food, not just this little bit that they have. But they have, and these are luxury foods. They're not, they're not staple foods. They're not rice. They're not grain. They're not even salad foods. So they're really not staples. But they do keep So in verse 15, the men took that present, and they took double money in their hand and Benjamin, and got up, went down to Egypt, and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, and he said to the steward of his house, "Bring the men into the house, and butcher an animal, and prepare for the men will dine with me at noon." The man did as Joseph commanded, and the man brought the men to Joseph's house. The men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house, and they said, "Because of the money that was returned in our sacks the first time, we're brought in, that he may seek occasion against us, attack us, and seize us as slaves along with our donkeys." They came near to the steward of Joseph's house, and they spoke to him at the door of the house and said, "Oh, my lord, we indeed came down the first time to buy food. When we came to the lodging place, we opened our sacks, and behold, each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. We have brought it back in our hand. We have brought down other money in our hand to buy food. We don't know who put our money in our sacks." He said, "Peace be to you. Don't be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your money." He brought Simeon out to them. The man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet. They gave their donkeys fodder. They prepared the present for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. When Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house, and bowed themselves down to the earth before him. He asked them of their welfare and said, "Is your father well? The old man whom you spoke, is he yet alive?" They said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." They bowed down humbly. He lifted up his eyes and saw Benjamin, his brother, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me?" He said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Joseph hurried, for his heart yearned over his brother, and he sought a place to weep. He entered into his room and wept there. So he's so moved when he sees his brother. He's literally moved to tears, but he's still selling the lie that he doesn't know them. He literally has to run out of the room, have a good cry, and come back. He's so moved to see his younger brother. And it says, he washed his face and came out. He controlled himself and said, "Serve the meal." They served him by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians don't eat with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. Now, I went through some commentaries to try and figure out why this is an abomination to the Egyptians. No idea. And it might be that it is foreshadowing what's going to happen in Exodus, that it's really talking about the fact that all of the descendants of Jacob are going to be slaves in Egypt, and so the Egyptians don't eat with their slaves. But I think it's also interesting that Joseph eats alone. He's a Hebrew, but he doesn't go sit with his brothers, even though they're Hebrews. He hasn't told them that he's their brother. They don't even know he's a Hebrew. So he sits alone. And perhaps they interpret this as he's a lord of these Egyptians and they're beneath him, so he doesn't eat with them. It's hard to say, really. But even though he is lord over these Egyptians, he doesn't get to eat with them. So there's something more going on here, I think, that it's an abomination to the Egyptians. Maybe something in the text will tell us why. So verse 33, they sat before him the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth, and the men marveled with one another. He sent portions to them from before him, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. They drank and were merry with him. So my translation now says they drank and they were merry with him. That's not exactly what it said before, but you fill in the gaps. I don't want us to get canceled on YouTube. I think it's another interesting cultural practice here that they sit in order, in the order in which they were born. So the youngest is at the foot of the table, the oldest is at the head of the table. They sit according to their birth order. And we see that Benjamin is given 5 times as much as any of theirs. Now, this is actually back to front from the ancient practice in Egypt. The firstborn was always given a double portion in Egypt. But here we see Benjamin being given the double portion, and it's even greater than that. So Benjamin is clearly being honored in this way. He's definitely being singled out, and I think that attention is meant to make his brothers nervous. So let's keep going. If no one has any questions, I'll keep going in chapter 44. All right, it says, he commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in his sack's mouth. Put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, with his grain's money. He did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. When they had gone out of the city and were not yet far off, Joseph said to his steward, up, follow after the men. When you overtake them, ask them, why have you rewarded evil for good? Isn't this that which my Lord drinks, and by which he indeed divines? You have done evil in so doing. He overtook them, and he spoke these words to them. They said to him, why does my Lord speak such words as these? Far be it from your servants that they should do such a thing. Behold, the money which we found in our sacks' mouths we brought again to you out of the land of Canaan. How then should we steal silver or gold out of your Lord's house? With whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves. He said, now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found will be my slave, and you will be blameless. Then they hurried, and each man took his sack down to the ground, and each man opened his sack. He searched, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. The cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. All right, so I see Minerva saying, I feel that Joseph ate alone, perhaps because he had much on his mind, and also because the Lord of his domain, also being the Lord of his domain, he felt a decision to enlighten his brothers would come eventually, later. Yes, so it may be too, the text is highlighting that Joseph is plotting. We see that he comes from a long line of plotters. Abraham deceived people as he traveled. Isaac did as well. So did Jacob. And Jacob did so more so than his father and his grandfather. But here we see that Joseph really is the best at it. If that is the legacy of his fathers, he has taken it and perfected it. But here we see that in verse 13, they tear their clothes, each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. Now, they're honest men, and they are going to live according to their word. But they're tearing their clothes, and this is a sign in their culture that they are grieving for someone who has died. They are, in fact, grieving for the loss of their father, because their father said that if Benjamin doesn't come back, he will be bereaved to death. So he will literally die of grief if Benjamin doesn't return home. And so when Benjamin is taken into slavery by Joseph, they tear their clothes. They know that their father is not going to live if this actually comes to pass. In verse 14 here it says, Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there. They fell on the ground before him. Joseph said to them, "What deed is this that you have done? Don't you know that such a man as I can indeed do divination?" Remember, he was appointed to Pharaoh as an interpreter of dreams. This is his reputation in the land of Egypt. He is a diviner, an oracle, someone who does divination. Judah said, "What will we tell, my lord? What will we speak? How will we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Behold, we are my lord's slaves, both we and he also, in whose hand the cup is found." He said, "Far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand," my Bible has decided not to turn pages anymore. Excuse me. "The man in whose hand the cup is found, he will be my slave. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." Then Judah came near to him and said, "O my lord, please let your servant speak a word in my lord's ears, and don't let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even as Pharaoh. My lord asked his servant, saying, 'Have you a father or a brother?' We said to my lord, 'We have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, a little one, and his brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother, and his father loves him. You said to your servants, bring him down to me, that I may set eyes on him. We said to my lord, the boy can't leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. You said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will see my face no more. When we came up to your servant, my father, we told him the words of my lord. Our father said, go again and buy us a little food. We said, we can't go down if our youngest brother is with we can't go down. If our youngest brother is with us, then we will go down, for we may not see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One went out from me, and I said, surely he is torn in pieces, and I haven't seen him since. If you take this one also from me, and harm happens to him, you will bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol. Now, therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since his life is bound up in the boy's life, it will happen when he sees that the boy is no more, that he will die. Your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant, our father, with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became collateral for the boy to my father, saying, if I don't bring him to you, then I will bear the blame to my father forever. Now, therefore, please let your servants stay instead of the boy, my lord's slave, and let the boy go up with his brothers. For how will I go up to my father if the boy isn't with me, lest I see the evil that will come on my father? All right, I think we need a moment to consider those words, because even the first time I read Judah's speech, it was incredibly moving. But this is exactly what Joseph is looking for. He's looking for a change of heart in his brothers. He's looking to see that they love Benjamin, that they will care for Benjamin, that they will protect him in the way that they didn't protect Joseph. And here he gets everything he's looking for. They are protecting Benjamin. They are protecting their father. All right, chapter 45. Then Joseph couldn't control himself before all those who stood before him, and he called out, cause everyone to go out from me. No one else stood with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept aloud. The Egyptians heard, and the house of Pharaoh heard. Remember, he sent them all away. And he cries so loudly that they still all hear him. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? His brothers couldn't answer him, for they were terrified at his presence. Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, please. They came near. He said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now don't be grieved, nor angry with yourselves that you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be no plowing and no harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth, and to save you alive by a great deliverance. So it wasn't you who sent me here, but God. So it wasn't you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his house, and ruler of all the land of Egypt. So here we see that Joseph ascribes his being in Egypt not to the evil that they've done, but to God's protection being over them. That God is looking out for them, because God knows that no one in Egypt is listening to him, right? The temples in the land of Egypt are not temples to El Shaddai. They are not temples to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are temples to other gods. They're not listening to him. So when God says there are going to be 5 years of plenty and 5 years of a famine, there's no one in all of Egypt that's listening to him. So God sends Joseph to Egypt because Joseph listens. Joseph listens to the voice of God, and he interprets those dreams. He did as a child. And he was not afraid to share those dreams which God had sent him with his brothers, even though he knew it could cause him harm. So Joseph was exactly the kind of person that God needed in Egypt at the time of the famine. But once again, these aren't my words. These are Joseph's. This is how Joseph sees it. And he says in verse 9, hurry and go up to my father and tell him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't wait. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you will be near to me, you, your children, your children's children, your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you. And there are yet 5 years of famine, lest you come to poverty, you and your household and all that you have. Behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. You shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that you have seen. You shall hurry and bring my father down here. He fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all of his brothers and wept on them. After that, his brothers talked with him. Oh, sorry, that just takes me a moment. That's beautiful. So verse 16, the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. It pleased Pharaoh well, and his servants. Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers, do this, load your animals and go. Travel to the land of Canaan. Take your father and your households and come to me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Now you are commanded to do this. Take your wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Also, don't concern yourselves about your belongings, for the good of all the land of Egypt is yours. The sons of Israel did so. Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provision for the way. He gave each one of them changes of clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothing. He sent the following to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and provision for his father by the way. So he sent his brothers away, and they departed. He said to them, see that you don't quarrel on the way. They went up out of Egypt and came into the land of Canaan, to Jacob their father. They told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. His heart fainted, for he didn't believe them. They told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them. When he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So I think it's amazing. Jacob doesn't believe them. Of course he doesn't believe him when he first hears it. But when he sees the wagons, which were sent by Pharaoh himself, he believes their words. I think, anything that he might imagine why Pharaoh's wagons are at his door is less incredible than what his sons are telling him. So I think we're going to leave this here for tonight. We'll pick up next week in chapter 46. This is an amazing place to end. Their father receives the good news. Joseph is still alive and is an important official in the land of Egypt. And next week, we'll see Jacob traveled to Egypt along with everything and everyone in his household. And it will just be an amazing story there as well. We only have a few chapters left in Genesis. I'm not sure if we'll finish up next week, but we very well may. Or we may finish up in 2 weeks from now. So I want you to think about, what do we want to study next? Do we want to go right into Exodus? Or do we maybe want to study some other portion of the Bible next? We don't have to go right into Exodus, but it does make a very natural progression going from Genesis to Exodus. But maybe we go back to the New Testament. Think about a book in the New Testament we might study. So just a thought. If you have any comments, go ahead and type them into the chat before we go. I want to thank you for being here online, to everyone who joined us. And remind you that next week we meet Wednesday at 5 o'clock California time. This is our Genesis Bible study at Restoration Church of Christ. I'm the pastor here, Ned Hairston. And before we go, I just want to wish you a blessed week. So come back and join us next week, or join us on Sunday evening. We meet at 5 o'clock on Sunday. So join us for some singing, for communion, and for another study of the Word. This week, the sermon is going to be on fallen angels. So that's going to be an interesting study. I'm going to be not only looking at books of the Bible, but I'm going to be looking at apocryphal books that didn't make it into the Bible. We're going to be looking at a little bit of medieval mythology, because not everything that you think about with fallen angels comes from the Bible. Just like we learned in last Sunday's sermon about angels and demons and ghosts. Not everything you learn about those comes from the Bible. And it was amazing to me when I first learned it, that there are ghosts in the Bible. So come back for a good reading of the Word, and I'll see you Sunday, if not next week. Blessed be.